Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Abrar, for joining us today. And I think a big thanks to HBL for showing their support for the ecosystem by sponsoring this event as well. So maybe a small round of applause for HBL as well. So Abrar, we're going to have a conversation around sort of the ecosystem and disruption. I mean, that's the theme of the event. But it'd be great to start off with sort of describing what is it that you do at HBL, because this is a relatively new role. It's not something we are typically accustomed to hearing about within the context of banks in Pakistan.
Well, first of all, I would like to really appreciate and congratulate Jahara for organizing this fantastic event. It's a privilege for us to be a part of this event, and I'm really grateful for you to give us an opportunity to be associated with the event. Well, coming back to what I do, well, fundamentally what we're trying to do at HBL, and that's my role, is to try and lead the bank through the path of digital transformation. And one major part of that effort is to figure out ways of working and collaborating with the startup ecosystem that's fast evolving in this country, and being able to figure out how we can partner and how we can leverage the startup ecosystem and the wealth of ideas and the brain power that is out there, that is not within the organization, but that exists in the ecosystem. How can we partner with them and benefit from them and add value for the consumer together?
So, you know, at least it's my personal perspective, and I've said this quite a bit, but banks are famously uninnovative in Pakistan, or they have been for the longest time. And it appears that there's a new sort of approach, which is to cultivate sort of internal entrepreneurship to a certain degree within the banks, but then also really become much more open to collaboration, which banks traditionally have not been, at least in Pakistan, for a whole host of reasons, including sort of regulatory pressures, et cetera, and whatnot. So HBL is one of those banks that sort of recently launched the Innovation Challenge. It'd be great if you could sort of speak to that as well. But sort of look into the crystal ball and tell us, what does HBL look like, especially when it comes to the ecosystem 24 months or 36 months from now?
Well, to begin with, I think it's a bit unfair to say it's only Pakistan. That's how globally the banking industry has been. But I'm really glad to see as we go around the world as well. The whole banking industry is realizing the value of revisiting its business models, to revisit the way it works. Having said that, there is a certain boundaries within which we have to operate because of the strict regulatory environment in which we operate. So even if we think that there is a different way of doing things and there is a much better way of doing things, at times we are constrained by what our regulation allows us to do that. But still, I think when you look at the Pakistan context especially, our regulator, which is the State Bank of Pakistan, has been very forward-looking, and I think we're very fortunate enough to have a regulator that is very friendly towards new technologies and new business models that can evolve out of technologies. So now the responsibility is on us as an industry to work with partners, to go to the regulators, to come up with new business models. And that is what you're now increasingly starting to see. So one of the things that we are now looking at doing is, you see, when we talk about digitization and transformation, everybody talks about putting up just a digital front end. That's not really what digitization is. So we're looking at two paths in our transformation journey. One of that is from an internal perspective. We're looking at our processes, policies. We're looking at figuring out where all are the data points that we have, how can we put them together, and how we can benefit from that. The other is working with the external ecosystem. That's what basically was the reason which led us to do the Innovation Challenge early this year. Because again, our viewpoint there was, instead of going out and throwing some money at people, we would rather become their first customer if we think that their idea is useful enough. I mean, there is no better testament than that, than to say, I will become your customers. And I'm glad to say one of the challenge winners, Vokala, is in this hall, and we should be hopefully rolling out the first proof of concept with them later this year. So we look 24 months, 36 months going ahead. I think as an organization, what personally I would like us to be able to be doing is to be far more data-driven in our decision making, to have lots more external partners working with us in helping us roll out new business models, but far more importantly in helping us transform internally as an organization. I think it's important for the lots of startups to understand, like few other panelists have said before me today, that it's very important for you to identify the problem that exists that you can go out and solve in a more efficient manner.
So I think that sort of segues into a natural question, which is, what are banks' biggest problems today that startups or entrepreneurs can look to solve?
I think that if you look at the themes that we had in our innovation challenge, I think that probably gives a good summary of what are the challenges that we're facing. Some of them are, we as an industry have huge amount of data. And when I talk about data, I'm not talking about the data only from the perspective of their transactions. We've got the data. For example, I've got the customer's date of birth. I've got the customer's balances in their accounts. Can I, through open APIs, go out and start offering services like authentication of their age, authentication about, are you accepting his check right now? Does he have his money in his account? These kind of so many interesting data points that we have available today that we can work on. Similarly, there are other data points within the structure which are about how things get processed, how different consumers react to different kind of incentives, which is what we have, but we've not been able to use very successfully. So that's one area where I think some interesting partnerships can be developed. The next is about machine learning. Again, putting all the data to meaningful use, and not just from a customer relationship perspective, but from our internal processes. Globally, the new thing is, the word RegTech. That is something that is hugely important. So if you can develop something for us here, you'll have global customers who will be looking at you for those kind of solutions. So that's one area which is extremely important. The regulatory technology, the machine learning, and looking at how to better utilize the data. Another area is the use of biometrics. I mean, look at the behavioral biometrics, which is again, basically machine learning and artificial intelligence, but behavioral biometrics again is another area where some interesting things can be done with the startups.
So I'm going to ask you to sort of put on your financial inclusion hat. You seem to be wearing a lot of different hats at HBL. So when it comes to financial inclusion, the biggest challenge seems to be the distribution of banking services to the long tail potential customers in Pakistan. Now, to sort of the surprise of many, the larger banks in Pakistan continue to put out more and more branches, which seems to fly in the face of what most would consider the go-to strategy, which would be mobile banking or digital inclusion through sort of mobile financial services, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on financial inclusion in Pakistan, and what does that look like in the coming years?
I think it's when people say that the future of the banking is not branches, I don't fully agree with that, because when you look at the context of Pakistan, for example, you've got 200 million plus population. But as a banking industry today, we've got, what, about 12, 13,000 branches? So assume you've got about 3 tellers in every branch on average. So you've got about 30,000 people out there who are servicing a customer base in Pakistan today. Those 30,000 people, each one of them can do, at best, 40, 50 transactions in a day. So that's about it, about 1.3, 1.5 million or whatever else. That's the bandwidth that as a banking industry today we can service physically. So physical branches are certainly something that is going to go on to grow, but those branches are not the way to scale up real fast. And that's where combination of digitization and a combination of the branchless banking will come through. And I think that's one of the ways. The other thing is obviously when you look at our regulatory environment, our regulator has been progressive enough. So today, for example, at HBL, you can now use an SMS to set up an account. We will very soon be expanding. You've got our ATMs, which are biometric ATMs. You can go put your fingerprint. 30 seconds, your account is active. You can send SMS. Under 30 seconds, your account is active. So those are the kind of regulatory interventions that will enable your account setting up. But then in terms of financial inclusion, I think the important thing is to give people reason to have that account. And that's where we also need to expand the digital payments ecosystem at the retail level. And that's where a lot of investment you will see coming in from most of the banks going forward, because unless we do that, the real objective of financial inclusion in the true sense will not be achieved.
So one of the sort of pain points for a lot of startups in Pakistan or a lot of aspirants within the fintech space is really interoperability with the pre-existing players within the financial system. And the complaint is always that the banks are very closed off. They're not really willing to partner. They're certainly not willing to open up. They're not willing to really work with the smaller players. So for the interest of the group, I know HBL's working quite a bit in this space and really looking to open up. It'd be great if you could say a few words about what HBL is doing specifically in this space and what can entrepreneurs expect in the next coming months and year or so.
I think for once I would say yes, guilty as charged. But we need to, yes, evolve as an industry. And one of the things, small things that we have started to work on is, which is a global phenomena, is around open APIs. That's one thing that we can go out and contribute. So we have just done our first open API, and Monas and his Easy Tickets are the first consumers of that open API. So that's what we are looking to do. We are going to build a whole stack of open APIs that we can then and put them in a sandbox environment and then invite more players from the startup ecosystem to come in, leverage on those APIs and create new business models. Because I think one of the things as an industry we will see going forward is the whole concept that we have been living off on is making lots of fee income from the customer. I think that whole business model is going to be changing. Globally, it's more and more about collaboration. It's more and more, the world is now starting to talk about giving power to the consumer through regulations to say to the consumer that the banks or any other industry, the data that they have, it's not their data, it's the consumer's data, so consumers need to be able to decide who that data is given access to and how that data is used, and they need to be able to go out and monetize the use of that data as well. So I think the models will evolve over a period of time where it will become more of revenue sharing models than about saying, this is my universe, I own it, you need to pay me for using it.
So I think you heard it here first. The biggest bank in Pakistan is going to become slowly much more open and hopefully a bigger partner to everyone within the ecosystem. So I think we're just sort of running out of time, but Abrar, if you don't mind, we can take some questions from the audience. So I think
Absolutely, happy to do that.
You expressed some interest in there. So if there are any questions for Abrar, we're happy to take them at this stage. Okay, so we're being told we can't do it. We can take one question. We have 50 seconds. Go ahead.
Data point that you have. So what sort of regulation model that you have followed that because your account holders also want to share the data with the businesses? How do you manage that regulation? Keep the interest of the account holder?
I think that's the challenge, not facing us. It's a challenge facing global industry. I mean, you look at Europe, there is a PSD2 regulation, which is forcing the banking industry to do open APIs and expose the data, but at the same time, there is a GDPR regulation, which talks about data protection as well. So the whole banking industry and the regulators, they're both struggling. And like I just gave you one example, I've got your birth date. I can start offering services of authentication of the age without giving out the birth date itself. But unfortunately today, even as a consumer, I'm happy to go out and enter my date of birth and few other things on social media. But at the same time, if my bank wants to share the same information with some other forum, I don't like it. I think, the bank is not secure enough because it's sharing that information. So that's the process of evolution we will all go through as a society in terms of accepting what gets shared, in terms of regulator kind of learning as to how new business models are evolving. So we are going to be taking baby steps. So our first step is enabling payments. So today, all the 10 million plus HBL account holders can now go to, for example, Easy Ticket, and they can buy cinema tickets. They are not dependent anymore on a plastic card or anything else. So that's the first baby step that we're taking. We will be working with partners to gradually take things forward, and wherever there is a need to go to the regulator, we will certainly go and talk to the regulators if there is a compelling enough case.
Okay. So I think that's time. So thank you, Abrar. And,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you.